It is my pleasure today to introduce Dipa Chauhan. She has an amazing story where, in one moment, the doctors looked at her and said, "Pray for your life," and she was out. When she awoke, she had a baby, she had family around her, and she no longer had parts of her body. What a beautiful soul. This conversation is full of lessons. She has so much gratitude and love for waking. And the following struggles that happened once she did wake up did not stop. She was thrown all sorts of challenges. She made a major life shift in her career and now helps others get in the right place to help reset their metabolic health. She is the author of the book called Living Light, where she helps incorporate simple lifestyle changes into your daily life. And she runs the Living Light Metabolic Reset Program, which is a 10-week program that helps people lose weight, improve their energy, sleep deeper, and wake up with feeling happy and peaceful. She is truly a beautiful soul, a great conversationalist, and I cannot wait for you to hear this interview. So let's just jump right in. Well, welcome, Dipa.
Hi, Tricia. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so excited to have you here. Thank you for taking time out of your very busy day to be here. I'm ready for a little coffee chat and back and forth. The audience is actually in for a treat today because I was just saying before this interview, so often when you look at successful people, people think it just happens. Like they've been lucky their entire time and everything's just gone their way. And what I'm actually finding is it's quite the opposite. Usually people who have really found their passion and their mission have done so because they've gone through tragedy and they've had to adapt and they've had to pivot or they've had a different change in their mindset or their life. And you mentioned that you had a life-threatening situation regarding your pregnancies that made you take a major life shift from being, a pharmacist, doing all the things that pharmacists do into what you do now. So I would love to take you back to that pregnancy and talk about kind of where you were before then and how that moment shifted you. Would you tell me what were you doing right before this all happened?
Thank you. Thanks for asking that question. Yeah. So traditionally trained as a pharmacist, at the time, I had a healthy pregnancy. So nothing really wrong with the pregnancy. I was working at a mail order pharmacy. I had just recently moved to the US because my husband at the time was living in the US. So I left my family behind, moved to the US from Canada. And then I was working at a mail order pharmacy, which is not what I wanted to do at all. I enjoy the more clinical aspect of pharmacy, but at the time I just needed to get a job because I had just finished my internship. Getting licensed into the US was not easy. They treat you, even though I was from Canada, they treated me like I was like a foreign student. So I had to jump through a lot of hoops and barriers to get there. And it was actually my labor and delivery, which was a little challenging to say the least. So my water broke on a Friday, a week early, just because you do get such limited time for maternity leave in the US. Usually it's around 9 weeks. I wanted to maximize that. And so I decided to pretty much work up until the end, and I was going to take the last week off. But that didn't go as planned because my water broke on that Friday.
It never goes as planned, does it? Those children are like, I'm out. Mine was the opposite. They just wouldn't come out. But anyway, okay. So you go into, was this your first child, by the way?
My first, my first and only. So
yeah.
My water broke. I had to call my husband, who traditionally trained as a chiropractor. I called his office. He's like, well, I have patients for the afternoon. Like, I got to finish seeing them. And my coworker who was sitting across from me was like, no, he needs to cancel the appointment and come get you. So I don't remember the details actually what happened, but ended up getting home. I was working with a doula at the time, and she had advised me to just, labor at home until I was having contractions. So this happened probably around 2 p.m. Didn't really have any contractions all the way up until 5:30 a.m. Even then, I didn't have contractions. So she advised, okay, at this point, it's been more than 12 hours. Let's get you to the hospital. I wanted to have a more natural birth. I had a whole birth plan outlined. I had a water tub, I wanted to have like a
I did
water
that.
birth. Yeah, I wanted
That
to have a
was fun.
water birth, but I didn't even make it into the water. So I got to the hospital and, they were just monitoring my progress, having me walk as much as possible to get the contractions going. Still wasn't happening. So at this point, it was probably around 2 or 3 in the afternoon, and almost 24 hours after my water broke. And they advised that, well, you're not contracting, you're not dilating, so we need to induce you. So I didn't obviously want to go down that route, but I got induced. And of course, as you know, when you get induced, your contractions pretty much go from 0 to 10. They're not natural contractions.
Yeah.
And so I got induced and had really debilitating contractions. So I had to take the epidural. So, one thing led to another.
That perfectionist plan didn't work out for you. Yeah, I know.
Farther and farther away from the birth plan. And so at this point, it's, getting into the late night, Saturday night, still not dilating. And
even
so
even with the Pitocin, no dilation at all.
No dilation. Ooh. So had multiple vaginal exams, and one of the vaginal exams, the midwife, because I went with a midwife group, felt my son's fingers. And so when it's an atypical presentation, they have to call the OGBYN on call. So they call the OGBYN on call, and he was pretty harsh with her and refused to come in. And so he called his resident to come take a look at what's happening. And, of course, she's still learning, may not really have a lot of experience. And she just said, oh, this is nothing to worry about. Let's just carry on. So went through the whole night without dilating once again. And then in the morning, I was finally, a little more dilated. So they said, well, okay, it's time to push. So pushed and pushed and pushed for like an hour and a half, making no progress. And at this point, the whole time, his heart rate, my son's heart rate was fine. But at this point now, his heart rate started to drop. So they're like, we got to call an emergency C-section.
Oh, geez.
So yeah. So
totally against your plan.
Totally the opposite. So went in for the emergency C-section, and he was born happy, healthy, and things started going downhill after that. So I started bleeding profusely. They tried to stop the bleeding with medication. And because I'm a pharmacist, I'm like, I know what that medication's for. And so I asked the OBGYN at the time, like, what's going on? And she's like, honestly, just pray for your life. And so that was the last thing I heard her say. Next thing you know it, I'm given an anesthetic and I'm, unconscious. And once I woke up, they had to do a hysterectomy because they couldn't stop the bleeding with medication. And the only way they could stop the bleeding of my uterus was by removing it. So I had to have a hysterectomy.
If I can interrupt for a second, you don't remember, like they said, pray for your life, and then you went black.
Yep.
What was the next thing you remembered? Like, did you just wake up, or there was nothing like while you were half asleep?
Yeah. So like once she said that, the next thought that came to my mind was, how is my husband going to take care of this baby by himself? And then basically,
because as women, we think we have to do everything, right? They can't possibly do it, like to poor men.
Exactly, right? And so, and then the next moment that, I consciously remember was coming out of the anesthesia. And so when I came out of that, I hadn't seen my son yet.
Right.
And so, of course, one of the first things, I got to see him and hold him. And so that whole week, I just felt really tired. I had lost a lot of blood. I had to have multiple transfusions. And I just wasn't able to pass a bowel movement. And so they said that, after multiple surgeries, like I had the C-section immediately after that to have the hysterectomy, they're like, you can develop something called an ileus, which is a slow bowel. So I said, okay. And it was summer. My son was born on August the 8th. And a week had gone by, and that OBGYN that refused to come in, he came in and he was quite apologetic.
Uh-huh.
And, I had a week later of being in the hospital, I hadn't passed a bowel movement. They really didn't want to send me home, but uh, I wanted to go home because I
Right.
felt like if I go home, if I'm in my own atmosphere, maybe I'll start to feel better. So he hesitantly discharged me. He gave me his personal cell phone number and said, if anything happens, give me a call. And that whole week, the one thing I always tell people is I never even had the energy to love my baby. That's how
Yeah.
like drained I felt.
And that's so
Um,
hard just as a woman and as a mom
mhm,
when you don't, because you almost feel like you don't love it or like you're doing something wrong, right?
mhm.
Like something has to be wrong, even though it was totally out of your control. You had lost tons of blood, major surgery. That's a hit to the heart.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And it just, that whole week, a lot of the midwives came in and they were just so distraught at what happened. They're like, in our whole career, this has maybe happened once. And they were just so sad for my loss in terms of
Yeah.
not being able to have any more children. But for me, um, at that moment, I was just focused on my son, right? Getting
Yeah.
home and actually being a mom and
Yeah.
just getting back to normal and doing normal things.
Yeah.
That it didn't even dawn on me that this is what happened. And that, maybe we'll get into it a bit later, but it
Yeah.
was years after that that I felt like I really had to formally grieve the loss of my uterus.
I
A
had to
lot of
do, yeah.
times,
We should talk about that later. Let's make sure that's
yeah.
on the list.
Because a lot of times, people will focus on women who have had miscarriages, and, of course, that's a huge loss, but no one ever really talks about having to lose your uterus, right? Which is kind of almost similar in a way, in some cases worse because, you physically can't have more children, right? And that was a decision that was made for me, not consciously made by myself.
Yeah.
Um,
It's huge.
so
And
we,
I think a lot of women can relate to that. I had a
Mhm.
hysterectomy and I had a voluntary hysterectomy due to many medical issues, but I wasn't planning on having more children. But at the same time, I was really sad. Like I was ready to get it out so I could feel better, but at the same time, there was a grief process
Mhm.
there. It's like you're losing, am I still a woman? Am I
Yep.
now just an empty vessel? What, like the whole purpose that we were put on this earth, right? To reproduce and to have, even, I mean, I kept my ovaries, so my hormones are still, I think they're still there.
Yep. Me too.
I don't know. I guess we'll fight, we'll just go with the flow, but, it is very much a grief process.
Mhm.
And it's funny, and I don't know if you've experienced this well, but even some patients come to me and say, well, I'm having heavy periods. I'm 30 some years old. I just want to get the uterus out. I'm done with it. And I have to say, wait a minute. Like,
Mhm.
let's have this conversation. We should, because there is benefit and risk. I had to take mine out due to issues, and I'm glad I did.
Yep.
But it did not come without some serious mindset reframing because it is really difficult. So I'm really glad you brought that up. And it's not just a part to be taken out. It's something to really be thought of. It's an energetically,
Mhm.
it holds so much energetically in our root chakra, right?
Yep. Yep.
You could probably speak to that and our root chakra is who we are. That's our
Exactly.
identity. That's what grounds us. So imagine someone ripping your grounding out of you and then you're like, who am I? And why the heck am
Mhm.
I here?
Yep. Yeah. So that was, something that I kind of had to come to terms with. If, like I
Yeah.
said, a few years later, when I was like, mentally in my head, I'm like, oh, these days people just have one child. They're so busy. And then all my friends and everyone around me is having their second, third child. And I'm like,
Oh,
okay,
yeah.
wow, like this can't happen for me, right?
Yeah.
And that's when that, whole rabbit hole started. But to finish off the story,
Yeah.
I basically went home almost like I said a week later,
Yeah.
and once again I still was feeling really tired, and it just lethargic.
Mhm.
And a day or two, once I got home from the hospital, I started having just really intense abdominal pain to the point where I couldn't even sit still. Like I was rocking back and forth. And my mom was with me at the time. And she's like, you need to call the doctor. I'm like, no, this is fine. It's normal. And she's like, no, you need to call the doctor. And so I messaged him. They admitted me immediately. I didn't have to go through the emergency department or anything like
Mhm.
that. They did a CT scan and found that I had a small bowel obstruction.
Yeah.
So I had to be admitted to the
Oh.
hospital again. And basically, they gave me about a week to see if the small bowel obstruction would spontaneously resolve because many times they do. And so I had to have an NG tube put in,
Oh,
couldn't eat
geez.
anything. And basically, a week later, still hadn't resolved, had another CT scan, still hadn't resolved. And so they had to do surgery. So I had to go in for another surgery, which they were really reluctant to do because I just had abdominal surgery.
Yeah.
And it was a long surgery. And they tried to do it laparoscopically, but there was just way too much scar tissue, which had caused a bunch of adhesions.
Wow.
And so they had to actually cut me open. So I have a C-section scar, and then I have another like 4 to 5 inch scar down the middle of my
Mhm.
abdomen. And
Which is
you
another
know,
grieving process.
exactly, exactly, yeah. And
Uh,
thankfully, they didn't have to take any bowel out, so there was no ischemic bowel. But it was a major surgery, and I was in total in the hospital for, including that first week plus, the recovery from the small bowel obstruction for almost a month. And so, obviously, I couldn't nurse my son, which, another thing that went out the window.
Yep.
And when I got home from those 4 weeks, like, my mom and my dad and my in-laws were all helping. I'm so grateful to have such supportive family. My husband stayed with me throughout the time that I was in the hospital and then went to work. So he stayed overnight at the hospital, went to work, visited our son. My mom and dad would bring our son to the hospital every single day as a
Wow.
newborn, just so I could see him for a few hours. But when I got home, I just felt like, he didn't know me, right? He was so used to my mom. I didn't really know how to hold him properly. And I really still wanted to nurse. And my mom and my husband were extremely supportive of that and really encouraged me to try. So I contacted someone from the La Leche League, and
Hmm.
they, I was pumping initially and giving him a bottle, and they're like, stop pumping, just directly nurse him. And I guess, it had been a month, so I probably didn't really have the greatest supply. So I would be sitting there for like an hour and a half, two
Oh,
hours,
geez.
nursing him. At the end of the nursing session, he would scream bloody murder because he's still hungry. So I had to top him up with formula.
Yeah.
And, a few weeks in, I was ready to throw in the towel. And my husband and my mom were like, just give it a few more weeks. So I gave it a few more weeks. And thankfully, one of my wishes came true. And within 9 weeks, I was able to fully transition him to be fully breastfed and get him off formula. So I nursed him till about 26 months. So
Oh, I wish
that
I
was,
would have heard that story back when because I did not produce a lot of milk. In hindsight, probably stress, probably a
Mhm.
sympathetic response, but at the time, I felt like an absolute failure that I couldn't feed my baby.
Yep.
And I
Yeah.
gave
And I
up
was
after a month or 6 weeks. I was like, okay, this isn't working, but maybe I should have waited just one more month. Oh well, shoulda,
Yeah,
coulda,
and
woulda.
I was actually told by the OBGYNs that I wouldn't be able to nurse because I had lost such a significant amount of blood, and
Mhm.
I'm not sure what the exact mechanism is, but it caused something called Sheehan syndrome,
Mhm.
which basically is when your pituitary doesn't work
Mhm.
properly and it affects lactation.
Mhm.
But here I am, I proved them wrong. So
You did prove them wrong.
yeah.
Looking back on that entire experience, I think about all of the things throughout our day that we complain about,
Hmm.
right? Oh, we're stuck in traffic. Oh, our boss wants this or that. Oh, our kids are here. My husband wants here. I've got this. Oh, we've got these bills we've got to take care of. All the things that run through our head every single day and the things that we worry about. And we don't realize how much we have until we lose it.
Hmm.
ever. We never do, right? We don't realize how much money we had 3 months ago when we don't have any today, right? We don't realize, how good our health actually is until we lose our health. And so I'm just curious, bigger picture, looking back, like when you sit back now and you say, okay, I went through this, almost lost my life multiple times, having to go through multiple grief processes over and over again, having to trust the medical professionals, having to trust your body. What lessons? Because you were obviously supposed to go through that. I believe that. I believe you were supposed to go through that because it was guiding you towards something that you had to do with your life that you weren't seeing at the time. And you weren't seeing it, so it threw you into something that made you make a shift. One, do you agree with that? And two, what is it, as you look back now, the big picture that this was intended to do for you?
Yeah, I absolutely do agree that this was my path. I did a few years, like I said, that 2 to 3 year mark when all my friends around me were having their second, third babies. I had to question, like, do we adopt? Do we do surrogacy? And we didn't end up doing those options because I felt like this was the path that God laid out for me. And one of the things that my sister-in-law actually said to me is, maybe this happened because your son is, meant to be someone who needs more support later in life because he's going to do amazing things, or, and so I do think that things happen for a reason. And, one of the biggest takeaways I would say from that experience is just to be grateful for, and not, and the reason why I'm so thankful for this is because I know a lot of people don't have amazing support systems. And I had an amazing support system with, like I said, my parents and my husband's parents. My mother-in-law is very religious, and she prayed for me for hours and hours and hours every single day. And so that's what I'm grateful for.
Well, the love around you, in general, is obviously so great, And so I love that appreciation, and it brings tears to my eyes as well, because how many people, it's like, oh, there's a lot of excuses. I don't have the support. I don't have this or that. We do, though. We have community. We have our neighbors. We have our friends. But we have to have enough self-worth and enough, I guess, kahunas to ask for help. And I find that as women, especially powerful women that handle a lot, we often don't ask for help enough. We don't want to look vulnerable. We don't want to look like we're needy. We want to be successful. And luckily you had that family there. But for those that are listening that say, oh, I don't have it, like I don't have, my parents are gone. I raised kids without any support whatsoever in my immediate family. But I found, I had friends that showed up to help. I mean, my husband and I are planning a trip this year, which is the first vacation we've taken alone in 13 years since our kids are like born, because we didn't have grandparents to babysit them for long periods of time. So we chose to stay home. And I had like my cousins, I had friends, everyone was like, we'll take a night, we'll take a night, we'll take. And I was like, oh my gosh, the community. There is so much benefit in us talking about these things because it relates us to other people and allows people even outside our home to step in and so generously give. And I just think about what world would it be if we all just came from that place, if we all just came from that place of love and gratitude and giving, and not so much from blaming our circumstances.
Absolutely.
I mean, you could have died that day.
Yep. And just really, shifting my mindset from like, oh my God, victim mentality to like, look what happened to me, blaming my body when my body was actually doing exactly what it was meant to do to, help me stay alive. Right. And
the fact that it didn't go to the bathroom told you, right? And most people be like, oh, okay, it's nothing, it's normal, and ignored those signs.
Yep. And then even just, the story kind of doesn't really end there either.
Oh, I'm sure. We'll keep going.
6 years later, I developed another small bowel obstruction almost to the date. August 11th, 2016.
Wow.
So had another small bowel obstruction, had to have surgery for that one. And then 2 years later, 2.5 years later, that one wasn't to the date, had another one. And that one was interesting because I had all the same symptoms in terms of, it wasn't so much the constipation or anything like that, but having this immense nausea. Had to go to the hospital. They did an x-ray and were like, yep, you have another bowel obstruction. And basically, we're ready to put the NG tube in, but they didn't have a bed for me. So I had about a 6 hour window from when I went to the hospital, got the x-ray, to when they had a bed ready for me and were ready to put the NG tube in. And within that 6 hour window after I had the x-ray, I just closed my eyes and I went into this like deep meditative state where I was just visualizing like my bowel unkinking and flowing and moving. And I kind of woke up after that. I was not really asleep, but I woke up from that 6 hour window and I told my husband, I'm like, I feel okay. Like I don't feel the pain. And he's like, okay, that's good. And so the doctors came, they're like, okay, we're ready to put the NG tube in. We have a bed for you. And he's like, well, she is not feeling any pain. Do you really need to put the NG tube in? And I was like ready to get it put in because after not sleeping the whole night, I,
Yeah.
wasn't really thinking properly. Thank God he was there and, questioned whether they really needed to put the NG tube in. And they're like, okay, sure, let's wait. And so we waited and waited. And they're basically like, if you pass gas, that means that you don't have an obstruction. And so I passed gas,
Whew.
and they sent me home. So another huge takeaway was just being grateful for all these little bodily functions that we have that sometimes we're like, ew. Even like when my son farts, I'm like, ew. But like being grateful for our body and all these things, amazing things that it does.
Yeah.
Um, it's just so powerful, right? And the power of our thoughts and the power of visualization, right? It's truly amazing what your body and mind are capable of and how it can really go against what their protocol is, right? And what they want to do. They want to put the NG tube down and do their thing. And
Yeah.
it was my husband who had to pause and kind of bring to light that, hey, her body is telling her that things are okay. So do we need to put that NG tube in?
I Can we talk about the power of visualization? Because you guys do a lot of this in your, because obviously, just to catch people up with the story, you went into pharmacy. This is when you started to look more in functional medicine, which I'm sure we'll talk about, and you help tons of people with this. But I do know that you help people with this, as do I. And I don't think people truly connect the mind to the brain in this. They think it's possible, but they don't understand how quickly visualizations can actually change your health.
Yeah. So one of the first things that we have our clients do when they become a client of ours is an identity and paradigm exercise, and really shifting their identity and their paradigm. Because one of the things that we focus on with our clients, our niche is metabolic health and weight loss. And if that identity and paradigm shift doesn't take place, then they're just going to gain the weight back and go back to being their usual self, right? Many times it's a protective mechanism for especially many women. Maybe something happened when they were younger. Maybe they were, really beautiful and something like a rape or something happened, or they were overly complimented and they use food as a coping mechanism to hide themselves. And so if they don't address the identity and the paradigm, then which is a huge part of mindfulness and visualization and really, future casting who they want to be, then they'll gain the weight back.
And we see this all the time. I mean, we see people who they've joined a gym membership and they go for 6 weeks and they quit. They change their diet and they lose a little bit of weight and it comes back. But we see this in other things as well. I see this in stress management. When you start, even when I started practicing, I started doing Joe Dispenza's meditations every morning and I started really looking at my visualization. Well, then things start to work and you start to feel better. And then what do? You forget a day. to do it.
Exactly.
Forget another day to do it. And then all of a sudden you feel like, wow, I'm feeling really low today. And you're like, oh crap, I didn't do my meditation the last 3 days. Like it's an easy trap to fall into.
Yes.
But I think it doesn't cost anything, number one, to wake up every day and really hone in on who you're trying to be and living as your future self. And it only takes a few minutes a day. Yet
Yep.
I find it's one of the hardest things for people to do. It's really easy to just fall into, like you were talking about, the victim, the blame, the I have to, rather than the get to. And there is a huge impact on the metabolic system, on your blood sugar, on your kidney function, on your liver function, on your breath, on your mind, on your serotonin, your dopamine, by actually doing these exercises. It can change your metabolic health. Yet, as I'm sure you found in the pharmacy world, it's like, well, let's just give metformin and semaglutide and let's just give blood pressure medications and all of this to manage the symptom. When actually, it never actually changes the metabolics. The body's still running on the same thing all the time. And the fuel we put in and the way that we tell our body to use that fuel matters.
Mhm.
And this,
Yep.
it looks like a missing link. Like to you and me, we're like, yeah, of course. But there's a lot of people that are like, whoa, that's new. But our bodies are so beautifully in tuned, right? To tell you, hey, there's something going on with this birth. Hey, there's something in the gut. I wanted to ask you, did it turn out that you had a celiac or anything from that? Like why all the bowel obstructions? Did they ever figure that out? And was it the obstruction that caused the problem with the delivery or the delivery that caused, did they ever figure it out?
No. So the second one, I think the second one was probably due to some stress. I definitely feel like I had SIBO, which is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth at the time, which probably, I don't know if that created some additional adhesions, but they basically just said it's adhesions, like, and it's scar tissue, and there's nothing that can be done. And so after the second one, I actually went to, they have a few centers around the US. It's called Clear Passage. And it's basically a center for people who have had bowel obstructions and other abdominal surgeries to kind of help with releasing some of the scar tissues. And then they give you like an at-home program to follow for maintenance and long-term prevention, so to speak, because I did want, if they're saying that that's what they're all due to, I'm like, okay, well then I need to address the scar tissue, right? You can't just tell me it's scar tissue and then not give me any other. They're like, no, you can't do anything about it. But when I did some further research, I came across castor oil packs, and then I came across this Clear Passage place, and so I went there for about a week in Florida and had a lot of scar tissue work. Like I said, they gave me a home protocol to follow. The third one, the one where I was able to avoid the surgery, my mom had asked, she's like, well, what's causing all these bowel obstructions? And they're like, well, it could be if she's eating really fibrous food like celery or broccoli stalks. And a few days before that, I actually had put, I'm not really a big fan of celery, but my sister-in-law had made a salad with celery in it, and I'm like, oh, this is a nice addition. So I was eating a bit more celery those, previous days leading up to that. And so I think that third one was due to, as you know, with celery, it can be really stringy. And if you don't chew it properly, it can, especially for someone with issues like mine, it can get stuck and cause that bowel obstruction, right? So I avoid celery like the plague now. If it's in anything, I pick it out and I don't touch it.
Yeah. And do you do daily visualizations and things like that towards everything working well now?
I don't really do daily visualizations regarding that, but I do still do a lot of scar tissue work, manual scar tissue work with my hands. I also have something called the dolphin neurostim, which helps release scar tissue. I also use like suction cups to help release scar tissue. And so, because that area, just because it has been operated on so many times, is very stuck, right? And I know, in the last few years, one of the big topics in health, especially in the natural health world, is the importance of fascia and how having multiple surgeries can really impact the fascia in a negative way. And so I do try to maintain some of that scar tissue work as best as I can on a daily basis. Like
Have
just
you
yesterday, my husband was saying, "Oh, you spend like if someone followed you around, like your half your day is like spent on like self-care." I'm like, "Well, I have to, right? Like it's
well, you
just
don't have to. I mean, you choose to,
I choose to, yes,
which is because you've had this experience, you choose to. Like most people would say, well, you have a business, you have a kid, you have a husband. I don't have time to take care of myself.
hmm
And I argue we always have time to take care of
hmm
ourselves, but we don't always realize that until we lose it.
yeah.
Have you done follow-up CTs to see if the scar tissue is holding or becoming less with all these activities by
I
chance?
have not. I have
Ooh,
not.
we got to do
Yeah,
that. I'd
yeah,
be so
yeah. I have not.
curious. I would be
Yeah.
so curious. I really would. I
So
would.
this has been, I think, the longest because the first one is 2010, then it was 2016, then it was 2018. So we're at 2025. I've gone 7 years strong. So
There you go.
yeah.
There you go. There you go. Amazing. It's been so many years. And in that time, so tell people a little bit. You abandoned the pharmacy. You just said this male pharmacy isn't working. And you opened your own clinic with your husband. Do you want to tell a little bit about that and the inspiration behind that?
Yeah, so basically, after the birth of my son, they gave me an additional 4 weeks, right? So it went from 9 weeks to 12 weeks, just because of what happened to me, and or 13 weeks rather. And I said, you know what? I know this is going to be my one and only, so I'm quitting my job. So I ended up quitting the mail order pharmacy,
How
and
did
I
that
think
feel? Was it like scary and like liberating all in the same moment?
yeah, it was a bit scary because just another kind of backstory. So I actually started getting more into functional medicine prior to all of this happening when I was working in the oncology department as a
Yeah.
pharmacist. And because Sachin, my husband, was getting into it, he was working as a traditional chiropractor. And it kind of piqued my interest, right? Because I saw all these people coming in from complications from chemotherapy. And, the dietitian, bless her heart, it's what she knows. She's following the standard of care. Drink this Ensure
And
shake and drink
sure.
this
Oh,
like sugar-filled like smoothie, like, and
my
I'm
mom
just
was actually told during chemo to eat McDonald's, ice
yep,
cream, and Ensure. That's what she was told.
yep, yep.
And
And
I was
this
like,
is
how
what I
about bone
saw.
broth? Do we want to make some bone broth
Yeah.
maybe? Like, maybe we could go with some chicken soup? Like, let's go back to the basics here. But no, literally told Ensure, ice cream, and McDonald's, which
Yep,
broke my
because
heart. But anyway.
they don't want them to lose weight, right? And
Hmm.
so I'm just like, this is when I was starting to get into this. I'm like, this doesn't make sense, right? And so that's when I started questioning things. But I still had to. That was my path, right? Was pharmacy, and so that's why I carried on with when I moved to the States with my internship there, getting my license there, and I would have gone back to the mail order pharmacy job if it hadn't been for this experience.
Yeah.
But because of this experience, I quit. At the time, my husband was working, as I said, at it was kind of like a chiropractic offices out of gyms, and it was like he wasn't an employee. It was set up in a way that he got a significant cut from
Hmm.
the clients coming in. It was like a revenue share model. And
Hmm.
they were just opening so many so quickly all across the US. And he was kind of going back and forth between two practices, and theirs were doing, their clinics. So he was working with another chiropractor. Their clinics were doing the best in terms of revenue.
Hmm.
But the other ones that they were opening up so quickly, they weren't really getting up and running so quickly. So they had a huge back pay that they owed him because they were using the revenue from those two clinics to pay off the debt from the other clinics they were opening. So they, at the end, owed him over $65,000. We just had this new baby. His parents had to move in with us because their business foreclosed. And so they moved in with us. So he had a lot on his plate. I quit my job. And so he was like, well, I don't know when I'm going to get paid now. I'm 65K in the hole. And so he decided to just leave and start up his own business, which was, what's known today as the Living Proof Institute, and
which is amazing. And everyone should look it up right now. Living Proof Institute. Absolutely.
Yeah. And, go more into that functional medicine realm, because he started learning about it, applying things on his own, and decided to just, go all in on that. And so, that was probably around 2011, a year after my son was born.
Jeez.
And I guess it was around when my son was 18 months. So I stayed home with him for 18 months. And around that time, I'm like, okay, you know what? I'm going to put him in daycare just twice a week and help out Sachin 2 times a week. And I was doing mostly administrative type of stuff to help him out. And then I decided to get trained in functional medicine and, really help him. I didn't really go all in on it. I got my certification, but I really didn't go all in on it, I would say, until about 2020, to be honest. I was mostly behind the scenes for most of those years. And I was really afraid to put myself out there, afraid to be on podcasts like this, afraid to post on social media. And it wasn't until the pandemic, which is when I started becoming more forward facing with the business and, offloading the admin stuff and the back end stuff to team members. So
it was an interesting time. I did the same thing during 2020. I've always been, I'm generally an extrovert. I'm not afraid of going on camera, but in my business, I didn't. Until 2020, there was a shift. It's like, once again, these things happen and they're so tragic, yet they're so amazing all at the same time, because if you're really in tune with it, you see all these opportunities open to become authentically you.
Yes.
To grow from every single opportunity. And you're so lovely on camera and you speak so well that most people are probably like, what do you mean you couldn't do it? Like, how many people out there are afraid to be on something like this? And really, if you just are yourself and you show up with good intention, it comes across well. But we're so afraid. We live in so much fear. So I'm happy you did make that change. Very happy you made that change.
I think the shift was just, it's not about me. It's about the message, right? It's about being vulnerable, as you said. And, one of the things quotes that I always come back to is from Wayne Dyer, where it says, don't let your music die within you, right? So really, if people don't hear your message, then how can you transform lives, right? And it wasn't really until 2020, which is when I started putting myself out there, that a lot of, being Indian, we have a huge community. Like I'm sure with Indian weddings, we have like 600 people at our wedding. So we have huge communities. And it wasn't really until 2020 when I started putting my message out there that a lot of my friends and family started reaching out to me, right? That's when they really knew, oh, this is what she does, right? I know she's not doing pharmacy, but what does she really do? And so when I started putting myself out there, like I would say, at this point, we probably have like over 50 of our personal friends and family that we've helped because, of the message that we put out there, right?
And relying on your community. I mean, that's what I love about the Indian culture the most, is how you all eat as a community. And by the way, if I could live on Southern Indian food for the rest of my life, I would. I just want you to know that's my absolute favorite. Like I will never say no. Actually, I said no the other night because I was going to see Wicked and my friend was like, we should go get Indian food. And I said, you're going to have to roll me into Wicked. I'm going to fall asleep because I'm going to be so full because I love it so much. I can't not eat a ton of it. But the point being that it's time to sit, you converse, you talk, you have a meal. We don't just shove the meal down like I was going to before Wicked, which is why I opted against it. And we just did like a quick little appetizer. But I was like, that is the culture of it, the community of it. The food is medicine, the Ayurvedic aspect of it, that every single spice that's used in that food has a medicinal benefit. The energy of the food, the place we go, the 10-year-old serves us. It's a family organization. Everyone is all in, is a community. And I think if there's a message to be had from this interview alone, one, you leaned on your community during your worst time and they stood up for you. You went out into your community during 2020 and they showed up for you. and you're in a culture, and we're raised in a culture, and all community and people showing up for you. And so for me, we are not alone, even if we feel alone. We are
Yep.
all connected in
Yep.
some way by our message, by our story. And I love your story for that. What a strong, like, example of almost letting go and trusting and not planning everything, right? Because we plan
Yep.
everything to go a certain way and then we beat ourselves up. And you had so many things that you did beat yourself up for and then let it go, and it ended up working out for you in the end. So bless you for that. I love that. I
Thank
absolutely
you,
love that.
Tricia. Thank
So
you.
as we wrap up, what message do you have for everyone listening today? Any takeaways for them? Anything they can do if they're going through a similar time of what you went through? What can you lend them?
I would say, as you have so eloquently said, is to really lean on your community. I think you hit the nail on the head. It's like you read my mind when
I'm
it
good at
came
that.
to, yeah, when it came to asking for help, because that is something that I really do struggle with, is
Mm-hmm.
asking for help. And in that moment, in those many moments, I
Mm-hmm.
was forced to ask for help, right? And I couldn't have done it alone. And I know some of you don't have friends or family close by, but these days, one of the silver linings with social media is that there are so many support groups, so many people that are willing to help, and so many, I believe in the kindness of human beings. And I
Mm-hmm.
know with, once again, social media, the bad side of it, and even with,
Mm-hmm.
TV in general, a lot of the things that we watch are negative, but I believe that there are a lot more beautiful, lovely human beings out there than the bad human beings, and people that are willing to lend a helping hand. And also, number two is, as you mentioned, learning to let go, which is, as many women have difficulty with, wanting to be in control, right? Wanting to things go exactly as they plan. And I think that we can't really plan for very much, right? We may have an intention for things to go a certain way or to happen a certain way, but be flexible, right? And rigidity is one of the signs of something dying, right? Whereas flexibility, flow is where life lies, right? So really being flexible, being willing to flow, being willing to shift things if they need to shift. And, that's something that my son has taught me as well, because
Mm-hmm.
I'm such a control freak and he's
Mm-hmm.
such a free spirit, especially when he was young, that I had to learn to let go and
Yes.
to, nurture this free spirit who was like completely opposite personality of me, right? So
Mm-hmm.
not only did I have to learn that in his birth, but also that's the kind of human being that he is, right? He's a free
Mm-hmm.
spirit. So um,
They're fun
so
to
many,
wrangle, those free spirits. I
yes,
mean, it
they
is, it's
are.
a good lesson. It just makes me, you had said, as we wrap it up, you were talking about music, and you know how much I love music and dance, and it brings me so much joy. And my dad was a musician, and I grew up around music, and I've always been dancing. And I think when you were described that, all I could think of was you have all these different beats in a music, right? You have the lyrics, you have the backbeat, you have the front beat, you have all these different ways that you can interpret a song, right?
Mhm.
You can sing along and belt it out, or you can kind of bounce along with the bass, or you can kind of hit the parts in between. And I think that's a beautiful analogy for everything you just said, because you have to jump from different parts of the music in a
Mhm.
flow and allow your body to just move with it. And that opens up so much more opportunity and puts you into a parasympathetic state. It keeps you in a calm state. So, thank you so much for sharing your story today and showing how beautifully that you dance to that music and how beautiful you are dancing to your music right now. I can't wait to see what you do next.
Thank you, Trisha. It was such a pleasure having this beautiful conversation with you, and I'm so grateful that I'm able to share and be on your platform.
Absolutely. Tell people how to find you real quick, and I'll also put it in the show notes. And then I will let you go dance to your music today.
Thank you. So, if you want to learn a little more about what we do, I think a great place to start is to download my free book. It's dipasfreebook.com, DIPAS, freebook.com.
Beautiful. And I'll put that below as well.
Thank you,
So
Tricia.
wonderful. Thank you, sweetheart. You have a lovely, lovely day.
You too. Bye.